And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection. I'm your host, Robert Pictou. Our show comes to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Sipshan people. Every small town has a story. Murder, She Told is a true crime podcast shedding light on cold cases and unsolved murders, missing persons, and crime stories that are often overlooked in Maine, New England, and small towns from away. We begin today's Open Connection as co-founder of Murder, She Told, Christian Sive, shares why she chose to become a victim's advocate.
There's many different levels that you can pursue. And, if you're going to become a social worker or like a state advocate or stuff like that, you have to keep going up in the ranks and doing field work and stuff like that. For me, this was after I started the show. I wanted to have some training under my belt and just be able to understand, I guess the term technically is like victimology. But I wanted to have a little bit of trauma training because we work with so many families one-on-one and, they're opening up about the worst things that's ever happened to them. So I just wanted to have a little bit of that training under my belt. So I went to college, essentially. I had to apply to college, which was a very stressful situation. I'm an actor and I went to school for acting, and I've never taken like a regular college course. So this was my first college course. Signed up for the course, took the course, then you basically take the test, and then you can apply for a separate organization to get credentials. So that's what I did, just so that I could feel confident when we work with families that, they can trust us and that I'm like taking care of them and, understanding them a little bit better.
So where did the genesis of Murder, She Told come from?
So I was on a different podcast that ended, and I decided that I wanted to, this was around like in 2020, and I decided that I wanted to do my own podcast. So I've been researching cases in Maine that, I really didn't know many cases in Maine. There's a cold case list, which is very limited, but I just started researching those cases and realized that there's so many cases around me that happened that people don't know about, or they do and they just forgot it. And the state just puts out the same blurb year after year. And I'm like, well, if people aren't talking about these cases, like the ones that need tips, how are they going to get solved? If people aren't talking about them. So I've always been interested in true crime since I was a kid. I grew up watching Unsolved Mysteries. And then another aspect of it is that part of true crime that I didn't like was that it really just, here's the blurb about the victim. Now let's get to the good stuff, if you will, which is the murder, the killer, that part of the story. And I'm like, but that's not the entire story. The victim's life isn't like an asterisk on the killer's story. It is the victim's story. So I wanted to create something that was a little bit more victim forward and work with families. I knew that I wanted to do that right off the bat and kind of breathe life into these stories that people really don't remember everything that happened. Or if they do, they might remember it a little bit differently, or they might not know a lot about it at all. I knew I wanted to focus on Maine and New England, just because I don't see those cases making national news very often, and I also don't hear them on other podcasts, like big podcasts. It's pretty rare, I feel, that you hear a case from Maine or a case from New Hampshire. So there's a lot of cases that need attention, that need people to hear them, that deserve that attention, and even just for people to know their names and know their stories. So that's kind of how Murder, She Told started. Thought about a name forever, couldn't come up with a name, and then one day it dawned on me that Murder, She Wrote took place in a fictional town in Maine, and I was like, that's it. So that's kind of how the name Murder, She Told was born, and brought him on board in early 2021, and just kind of been growing it ever since.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. No one knows for sure why a serial killer will choose a certain individual as their victim. We've heard their names: Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, Robert Pictou. We know in detail what they did and how they did it, but what about the victims? Let us return to the conversation as Byron Willis shares why he believes the focus should be on the life of the victim.
I didn't have any interest in true crime podcasts or even true crime stories. I didn't grow up watching Dateline and Unsolved Mysteries. I really loved telling stories, though. And for me, like, the most interesting part of the story is getting to know the life of the victim. So that was like really easy for me to like not focus on the crime aspect. I mean, I was just like, yeah, this is great. Like, let's learn everything about their life. I want to tell a compelling portrait of a person. And I love the research side of it. I like managing teams. Like, that's kind of like my background. Before I was into dance, I was a construction manager. So, like, that was, I don't know, it just felt like being able to put some of my skills that I've developed to use in a different way. And it feels really meaningful, like the work that we're doing. It feels like we're bringing old cases into the spotlight and telling them in a fresh way. A lot of this stuff is buried in newspaper archives, and there's nowhere you can go to like really learn everything about a case. And you'll find that 90% of the cases that we've covered are now like the top hit on the internet if you go type in the victim's name, and it's kind of a tribute to their life. It tells, of course, about their death, where the investigation stands today, but then we'll have a lot of all the sources that like if you want to go and learn more about it, it's kind of like a landing page for their story. And I just love that about what we do.
I'm particularly drawn to the unsolved cases. That might have something to do with growing up watching Unsolved Mysteries and stuff like that, but I don't know, I feel like I can help there, that this show can help more with the unsolved cases, just get them out there and just tell their story.
Yeah, we make a difference. Maybe the right person's listening, they make a call, and it can open up a case.
Literally just down the road was kind of a case that you stumbled across.
The James Hicks episode was the first one that I knew I wanted to do, just because I've heard, family members like talk about it here and there. And, people don't remember, at least from my perspective of learning about it from them, everything that happened. And I certainly didn't know everything that happened, but, and I also didn't know that growing up, there was like a shack that used to be, or like remnants of things down the road, like literally a stone's throw away from the house. And it was apparently where one of his victims, Geraldine Towers, was living at the time that she was murdered, which was before my time. But still, I had no idea that it was so close. And that my mom was the only one that remembered. And she was like, yeah, she lived on the street. And I was like, wait, what? Like, because I knew that there was a part in town, there's a bar in town, and that's kind of where she met up with this man, James Hicks, who's a terrible person. And, she ended up being killed by him that same night. And I knew that it's now a Chinese food place, and it's been a Chinese food place ever since I was a kid. So that's the only thing that I know it as, is China Way. But before that, it was called the Gateway. And I knew that was where she went missing from initially. It kind of blew my mind, because it's like, it's literally in your backyard. And, she was missing for almost 20 years before he confessed and, told the police where his victims were buried. So
yeah, and one of the cool things about that episode is that, because of Chris and her family's connections here to the town, I mean, like, we were able to get an interview with Chief Ricker, who was like in the Newport police at the time that this was all unfolding, and like, she has like a real personal connection to like all these landmarks and places. It's like right in your own backyard. So
yeah, this is kind of where one side of my family has grown up in this town, for years, generations. And then the other side of the family is the next town over. So it's very close-knit.
How did you guys start feeling when Murder She's Told started getting some traction from the media, and also to some places, and like this one, the Hicks case, it actually came to a conclusion.
So the Hicks case was solved in 2000. I think he was arrested. So I went into that one, preparing it as a solved case. But, there are other cases that I don't always hear when people like send in tips, but I know that it's happened. Because I have been told that, oh, I heard your episode and I, called up a tip, and that makes me feel like I'm doing something right. Getting people to call a tip that they've had, in their head for a really long time that could be the key to solving a case. I do feel like it's on the right path, and I feel good about the work that we're doing. The word ethical true crime is like really hot right now. I feel like it's a hot word right now, and people are kind of pushing true crime in a more ethical direction, which is great because we need to focus more on the victims and less on the sensational aspects of their story and less on the killers. But I feel like I made the right choice when I started the show.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. When they started in 2004, podcasts would have been best described as on-demand radio. There were audio shows available in episodes that listeners could find and download online. Today, podcasts have evolved into a highly diverse medium, and that medium itself offers something others simply lack: an intimate and personalized nature. Let us return to the conversation with Kristen and Byron.
Just based on the direction that true crime is going in, and based on the reaction of people, and really the reaction of families, like nothing brings me more joy than when a family is like, you captured my loved one really beautifully and told their story well. And, I just get that like stamp of approval. That's really meaningful to me. So yeah, I feel really good about the direction that it's going in, and the fact that it is being recognized in the media, because that means that other people are going to hear these stories, and it's going to keep, spreading wider, and more families might be like, I want my story told that way. Can you help me? And then just people hearing cases that they haven't heard of, or that they need to hear again in order to send in a tip.
About how many hours do you guys average on a show?
Just take the example of the one that we just did. Like we had talked to you for about 8 hours on your sister's case, and I think that like the finished audio for that ended up being 2 episodes, about an hour 15, hour 20, and that 8 hours of your interview time probably compressed down to maybe like 20 or 30 minutes of like clips. So I don't know, that's like a 16-to-1 ratio, but in terms of effort, like we start cases like 6 months or so before we produce them. And the first thing we do is we gather all of the information we could find about it. A lot of it's based in newspaper archives, and that's what we did with Virginia's case. So we take all of that, we index it, we create like a master document that has all the text on the case. Then we take that and we try to bring it into like a timeline, really synthesize the information and to make sense of it. Then we have to write a script, and then we do the vocal performance and the audio editing. It's a whole process. Like for Virginia's case, I would say that we probably spent, 150, 200 hours to finish the hour 20 product, that we ultimately produced, and the website work, that we did. So, it's a huge amount of work to create a final scripted, polished product. And, but I don't know, I think that's like what you're trying to deliver something that's like highly digestible, that tells a compelling narrative. And I think to make it feel seamless, you have to like put in the work, the preparation to figure out how to do just that.
There was a couple things that when I was kind of telling you about Virginia's story, that I could see that you guys have not been exposed to that much, and that was regarding residential schools and MMIW. Can you tell me about your first reaction that you had when you heard those two terms?
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about the residential school one. Like the concept of it didn't surprise me, but how recent it all happened is really surprising. I discovered in my research after we talked that like the last residential school closed in like late 90s, and it's just shocking to me that we had this kind of a program that was going on with so much abuse happening. And like the way that you talked about the idea that like after a census came out, people would hide the kids, so that they wouldn't get picked up by like the Indian authorities. I just didn't realize that like the height of enrollment happened in the 60s, and I'm like, that's in the living past. Like there's people that like lived through that today, like your father. And I don't know, I guess it just felt more remote, the idea of it to me, and talking to you just made it feel really present and a tragedy.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
In her dissertation, An Awkward Silence, Missing and Murdered Vulnerable Women in the Canadian Justice System, Marianne Pierce identified thousands of missing and murdered women and were able to determine 824 were Inuit, Métis, or First Nations. Among her findings, Pierce found 80% of the missing or murdered Aboriginal women were not in the sex trade. This was despite the previously held perception that most cases involve prostitutes or women engaged in high-risk behavior. In this final segment of Open Connection, Christian shares how her show is helping people.
I was familiar with MMIW. I certainly am no expert on it by any means. I'm still learning. I run the Facebook page, and I would say for like the past 6 months, one of my personal missions has been to highlight other MMIW cases, whether, they're from Maine or not, because I see this discrepancy in media not covering them. And I'm like, well, I want my platform to be helping people, and these cases need attention. So I have been diving into, I'm creating my own spreadsheet of cases and what their status is, and, what tribe affiliate they're with, and, all of the details, because I don't feel like there is a database. You look at NamUs, and if you filter it to just Native American, and I think NamUs only is for American cases in general, but that's missing and unidentified are typically listed on NamUs. But if you look at it, the amount of Native cases is very small. And I'm like, that can't be all of them. And then you start researching it, and there's a lot of similarities where a lot of them are determined as accidents or, like unexplained deaths, but they all have common denominators. And I'm like, these all can't be accidental deaths. My experience has been just trying to learn more about other cases that need attention, and just through the community. But, certainly I have a long ways to learn. I want to be able to be an ally and have this platform be an ally to, families like yours that need attention, whether they're from Maine or not. So I am familiar with MMIW, but I would probably say on a more surface level, because I'm just starting that journey. As far as residential schools go, I think the first time that I heard about it was probably this past fall. There was a big mass grave that was found at one school, and I think that was probably the first time that I had heard about residential schools. Because I'm really tapped into the true crime community and in just a bunch of groups. And I remember an article from, I think, the CBC going around and just seeing like the outrage. But, it's not limited to just that one school. It's widespread. And I don't think that really, clicked in. And obviously the experience, like the personal experience, like it's one thing to read an article and see that, there were 700 kids that were found in this mass grave, but then it's another to hear the impact that that's made directly on a family and like a more personal aspect. So yeah, I think that was really my first time, was talking with you and learning about your dad's experience, learning more about residential schools and their impact and how it plays a role into everything else that came after it.
My heart really broke when I thought about the idea of the child, when they graduate, returning to their family and being so unfamiliar with the customs of their own family and their own traditions, that they felt like they didn't fit in anywhere. Like they didn't fit in with their family, didn't fit in with like white culture. It was just like this strange, lost generation almost,
The more people that know about the show and that hear it, I always, whenever I reach out to someone, send them an episode because, I want them to hear the work that's being done. Because I think that it really speaks for itself. So yeah, I do feel like it will continue to grow. And I mean, that's my only hope, is that it does keep growing and more families want to trust us with their story. And, I don't know, I'd love to have a case be solved.
Yeah, early last year, we got a shout out from a really big show called Morbid, and it was really exciting to see us in the top 10 of the, like the US true crime charts for some time. Exposed us to a much wider audience, and the show has, like continued to grow since then, and really this is only realistic to put the kind of production time and effort into it with an audience of a certain size, so like, we're still on that growth path. And, I think that the show has a really bright future.
It gives me hope that audiences do want this kind of true crime, that they're not just looking for the sensational stuff where people are, glorifying Ted Bundy, that they want the cases that aren't being talked about, the cases where the focus is on the family and the focus is on maybe something a little bit more educational. Like I feel like there was an educational aspect to the episodes on Virginia, and I hope that people take away some of what, we learned about the residential schools from this episode, and that people start leaning into a more compassionate true crime and understanding the family's story. I hope that that's the future that we're going in with true crime, and seeing that, people are checking the show out and sticking with it and sending me, nice emails about it does give me that hope that people are out there, that this is what they want for true crime, is they want the human side of it.
Yeah, we read all the reviews.
And emails. I try to answer every email because I like correspondence.
Is there anything I might have missed that you guys like to add?
Thank you for, trusting us with your sister story as well, because I know that that's not an easy story to open up to two strangers across the continent about, but I think it's a really powerful episode, and I've gotten some really good feedback about it.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind and heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.